afternoon. Thank you all for being here. I'm sorry you're partially blinded. Please feel free to kind of shift around as you need to see things and to be comfortable. It's a pleasure to have you all here. I would like to start by thanking first all of the faculty, staff, and students who I have had the pleasure of interacting with while I've been here. I came here for grad school from the Midwest, not really knowing what I was getting myself into, and it has been a joy and an honor to work with all of you. I especially want to thank my committee, Professor Steve Hurd, Professor Kyle Bogle, and Amy Gardner for all of their support, and my chair, Professor Draper, for continuing to support me and encourage me even when I had my own doubts about myself throughout this process. The title of my thesis is Designing to Engage Users in Sustainable Buildings. And engaging here, I mean to encompass the opportunity of both the building to engage me, to excite me as the user, to inspire me and educate me as the user, and also for myself to engage the building, to interact and to participate in what's going on and how the building is performing. And really, those interests arose out of this kind of recognition of how prevalent sustainable design and sustainable discourse has become in our profession, in my years of education in this profession, in this discipline. But also realizing that there was something missing from that. I was starting out on my final year of graduate school, having done all of this sustainable stuff and talked about all this sustainable stuff and critiqued it all, and not really connecting to it in a personal way. And also thinking about kind of the frustrations of things that fail sustainably or frustrate us as users. You go try and use the faucet, which is automated, which is great because it's sanitary and you don't use too much water, but then you're like stuck there trying to get it to work in the bathroom and people are looking at you crazy and you're frustrated. So kind of thinking about the scale of building at that architectural level and also at the scale of myself as a user of buildings. And thinking about what the impact the user has on the whole building environment and the natural environment. Ecological footprint is a measure of kind of the entire world population use of resources and how much land it takes to sustain our behavior. And in 2008, we were measuring at 1.5 Earths in 1 year. We were using 1.5 times the amount of resources that the Earth was actually able to continue generating for us. And based on this projection by the Global Footprint Network, who calculates ecological footprint, if we continue at that pace, and factor in increasing population, we'll be at almost 3 times the amount of Earth's resources in 1 year that we are using as a global population. So really trying to think about, people are a huge factor of this. Not only is the population growing, but we also are changing culturally and at a societal level in our understanding of our relationship to the natural environment. Historically and in different cultures and different times, we have been more biocentric. We have thought of ourselves as part of the natural environment, and we have conceived of the natural environment as having intrinsic value on its own, standing alone. More and more, especially in Western cultures, we have been tending toward the more anthropocentric side of the spectrum, where we conceive of nature and the natural environment as a service to ourselves. And this is reinforced by these spheres of motivation identified by environmental behavior psychologists, thinking about what impacts our behavior and how do we understand our behavior relative to environmental impact. First, we care most about the ego ourselves. We care about what impacts us directly. Then we extend that caring and that responsibility to our peers, to our fellow human beings, and then to the environment. We then think of the environment as something to take care of or to value. And so what we have really lost in our kind of transition to a more anthropocentric culture is this understanding of this biocentric understanding of the environment sphere actually being important to the self sphere. We don't understand the kind of intrinsic value of the natural environment to our own happiness and productivity, and how those things really act as more of a Venn diagram than a spectrum. And so, you think, well, surely this is changing, everything's becoming more sustainable, we're getting more efficient by the day, LEED and everything is everywhere, and it's all you hear about is sustainability. Well, I took a closer look at that, and this is just a kind of example view of some charts and studies that I did of rating design systems. And the importance of this is I looked at what are the category titles we are using to measure sustainable design, how are we evaluating sustainable design, and what areas of that are dedicated to users. You see a huge portion is dedicated to locating the building and use of resources and treatment of the natural environment. See a slightly smaller section dedicated to social and physical health. So what are the economic systems that are impacted? How are people feeling? How are people, do they feel comfortable? You see 15% of those categories dedicate themselves to design accountability, holding ourselves as design professionals responsible for being certified and having LEED certified professionals, LEED accredited professionals on projects and really being aware of these situations. You give almost no consideration, 3% of consideration for these rating systems to thinking about what is the user impact? What happens when we as the designers kind of leave the environment, leave the building process and give it over to the occupants? And a large part of this is potentially part of the explanation of why buildings sometimes don't perform the way we expect them to, because people will find a way to use the building the way they want to, whether or not we've considered that. So my thesis is really investigating how we can consider user participation in sustainable building performance and enhance user understanding of the impact of behavior on the natural and built environment. So really allowing buildings to be a tool for teaching and engaging users to better understand this relationship to the natural environment as being a codependent one.
Could you explain to us
Sure.
how the rating systems measure user?
Yes, so I guess for this category, the categories that I was looking at, I was looking at the category titles, and so it's not so much a metric or a number, but they assign points based on if you have an environmental management system in the building, if you engage users during the design process and teach them about, so that's where that is coming from. Sure. Mm-hmm. So if you want people to behave a certain way, you want to inform behavior, you have to know, what motivates behavior. And how do we motivate specifically conscious behavior and engagement with sustainable design and sustainable performance? First, people need to know what the problem is. They need to know, I'm using too much water. Then they need to know what to do about it. They need to have knowledge of the action strategies. They need to have the opportunity and be able to afford the cost in the sense of time, monetary cost, and effort to carry out that action. Their behavior is a factor of the perceived impact of their action. So if I feel like I'm not going to make any difference, positive or negative, by throwing my plastic water bottle in the regular trash, I'm going to do that because it's easier and I don't care. But if I feel like that's going to change the world, I'll make an effort to recycle that plastic bottle. And that also relates to attitudes and values. How are we raised and influenced in a society to appreciate and value the natural environment and our relationship to it? Perception of action and behavior incentives. How are we rewarded for our good behavior? Whether it be with lower costs or if everyone else is doing it, then I want to do it too. Commitment and sense of responsibility. If I make a commitment to something, if I become a LEED accredited professional, I've made a commitment to taking a responsible stand in building design. And freedom of choice, which is incredibly important culturally, especially in the United States. We have adopted this culture of just wanting to be in control and have our own environment at our fingertips, and really allowing it to be all driven by each of us. So thinking about how buildings and spaces actually contribute to behavior. This example from the Dogon culture in Western Africa is the Togana, which is the cultural meeting place for the village. that where the elders meet to make important decisions for the village. And it's intentionally built with a roof that is about 4 feet off the ground, so that you have to remain seated inside the building. You have to remain seated because that is the way that they engage in civil conversation and important decision making, so no one's standing up and yelling over the other people. We have another precedent looking at a building redesign for a transfer station that the facade was redesigned. It was falling victim to a lot of vandalism. Young kids were throwing rocks at the one window in the building and breaking it. So NL Architects did something really innovative, and they said, you know, if you want to pile on this building, you want to throw rocks at the window, let's just flip that around a little bit. We're not going to take that away from you, but we'll turn the window into a basketball hoop. So now it has a background that you can throw a ball at, and it'll be great. And we'll turn the side wall into a climbing wall, and this building that was kind of this place of horrible and dangerous behavior has now become kind of village square wrapped around the box, is how they describe it. Also thinking about precedents that engage the arrangement of spaces in sustainable behavior. So Oak Alley Plantation in Louisiana was situated to capture the natural breezes and winds of the site, and used a lot of passive strategies to deal with the Louisiana climate in a time of no air conditioning. And a big part of that being successful is this design of redundant living spaces, and the idea that you just kind of moved around from different parts of the day. So it was cool on the western side of the building in the morning, and cool on the eastern side of the building in the evening. And
Renee said if you were white.
Okay. Also an important thing to consider. So how do we test this? How do we understand, where this happens? My test site needed to be somewhere that was kind of ordinary and representative of condition that we could find all over it, because the importance of bringing sustainability to every user comes in the everyday. So I chose an office building in downtown Silver Spring, Maryland. Downtown Silver Spring is just on the northern edge of Washington, D.C. And I chose that site for a number of reasons, especially when choosing the location for the building site. It's located within a quarter-mile walk of the Metro and MARC stations for, commuting to work is obviously a sustainable choice as opposed to driving. Also within a quarter-mile radius of the new public library that's being constructed and will be the future stop of the Maryland Purple Line light rail train. And nearby Ellsworth Drive and Veterans Plaza are important retail, entertainment, and civic spaces for the city. So we're seeing in work culture this desire to be close to other amenities and kind of integrate this live, work, play environment. So this site really supports that. Here are some images of what that looks like right now. It's a parking lot, 2 parking lot sites actually adjacent to each other. This site adjacent to my building here has been proposed as a residential building, so I've drawn that in as we expect it to be built. Just some other office buildings in Silver Spring, and thinking about the speculative office building as a great playground for this idea of user engagement, because the work environment is changing, and we're seeing a lot of people really thinking about a dynamic work environment where they're moving around, where they're experiencing different things, they're more mobile in their work. So how can we celebrate that work culture with also a sustainable living culture? One of the ways to kind of integrate different types of program was a precedent that we visited when in Scandinavia last summer, which is actually a residence hall, but incorporates this idea around the exterior circle of the circle, these individual living spaces, and then marries that on the interior circle with active shared spaces of kitchens and study areas, and then they all share a courtyard as well. And so this kind of negotiation within one building of different scales and types of programs and spaces. And so thinking about how the program relates to site, I did a number of studies of the sun condition on the site. As you can see, with north being up on this drawing, the sun kind of comes around and ends up on the western side of the building over here. So we get a significant shadow from this tall building here, and this tall residential tower at different times of the day. And what I noticed from that study was that we are actually seeing significant sun on the building at 1 p.m. and at 8 and 9 a.m. in the morning. It's coming in kind of before, so these buildings are lower. So it's coming in over these buildings, and then it gets shaded, and then it comes back, and it gets shaded, and it comes back. So thinking about how we overlay that system of those sun paths, map them onto the floor plates, and start to use that to shape how this building is performing. And then overlaying that with this idea of program, and thinking of how the typical office building, core and shell structure can be kind of carved by light and site conditions and reimagined to have still that sense of private office culture, leasable tenant space, marketable area, and then also this shared space and this atrium, not unlike the dorm from Copenhagen, that really becomes this celebration of sustainable practices and sustainable behavior. So you have this opportunity to engage with environment and understand that at different times of the day you want to be using different parts of this building depending on where the sun is, and also understanding that the programs change. I'll talk a little bit more about that as I go through the specifics. And so how does this building as a whole engage these ideas of energy, water, and waste, which were the primary focus of how I'm measuring and relating these sustainable and user-related problems and issues. And thinking about how do we understand the systems and the operation of energy, water, and waste at a building system scale. This building has solar hot water on the roof to heat faucets and showers for the commuter, bikers, and the fitness center in the building. Also, rainwater collection on the flat roof surfaces to be used for irrigation on the roof garden, and the composting of organic waste on the roof garden as well. And then a gray water filtration system for flushing of toilets. Also, the roof here of the glass atrium that is angled brings water down on rain chains and kind of celebrates this event of rain and collects that water, which then is also recycled through the building for use. And thinking about what are kind of the implications of all of that on the occupant and the form and the material of the building. In terms of form and material, it became very important to study what that solar condition is on the west facade. In particular, these studies are of the west facade and southwest facade, and how they are shading light, allowing light into the spaces in the winter months and shading light in the summer months, and thinking about this system, which really kind of is comprised of this structurally typical office building core supporting floor plates that's then kind of interrupted by this beautiful atrium space, which is a cable net glazed system, which becomes opaque, insulated concrete panels lower down where the building is actually in the shadow of its neighbor here, and thinking about how the interplay of that kind of heavy structure and that light structure engaging each other, and thinking about how we understand what kinds of uses and what kinds of spaces relate to the more enclosed private work areas and the shared atrium spaces. So that's kind of the general overview, the general walkthrough of the building as a whole. But what really drove this thesis, and what's really most important about my design process, was, of course, this scale of the user. What do I, as a person using this building, experience every day, and how does it relate to my own understanding of my sustainable performance? So I went through a process of trying to diagram and understand what the occupant interaction with a building is in a day. And it sounds like something we should do all the time. That makes a lot of sense, because of course we're always designing for users, right? But when it came right down to it, I realized that I had never really drawn in this way before. And so I started looking at this kind of module this noli plan-esque diagramming of what kinds of spaces we're using throughout the day. What is their light quality? What is their connection to other spaces? You know, is it an opaque wall? Is it a railing or kind of an open space? Is it a glass wall? And what are the opportunities in each of those spaces to produce energy, to use water, to save water, to produce waste, to recycle waste, and to measure kind of that performance, and measure it in a way that is significant to me, the user. So, we are going to go on a little walk through this building, and all of these renderings in this scenario was taken for today, May 15th, 2015. So we can imagine that we all got up and went to work in Silver Spring this morning. At about 8:30 in the morning, we would have arrived in this atrium, and you know, it's sunny, so that's fortunate, legally accurate. And we would have been attracted to this beautiful staircase that's lit by the morning sun coming in at the back of the building. This is the ground floor plan, so the sun is coming in here, and we're drawn into this stairway, and we're aware of metrics for building and user performance kind of being displayed in this space. It's an active and social space to greet you in the morning. You can get your coffee, you can meet your coworkers, you can bring your child to daycare. There's a daycare on the first floor of the building. And along this walk, as you're being drawn into this staircase, your usage of that pathway is generating energy through these piezoelectric floor tiles. And while this technology is not extremely productive at this time, it would produce an amount of energy that could be used for powering Wi-Fi or electric signage, so potentially powering the performance of these metrics, the display of those metrics, or Wi-Fi in that atrium space. And then you would go up the stairs to the hallway that would take you to your office, and you would be up here in your office, and you would work for a little while, and you would come upon 10 a.m. and be feeling really good about your day, and you would arrive and work in this environment where you have an opportunity to open the windows at your workstation, then that cross-ventilate into the corridor, and control the lighting in zones parallel to that window as you need light, and think about the intensity of that light. And then there's also, you know, each of these scenarios is kind of accompanied with this design idea, which is more of a diagram than an actual solution at this point, but which is starting to speak to what is the scale at which we can use technology to improve our own user performance rather than just completely overtake the user. So instead of just having a building that automates all the lights and all the windows and everything just kind of runs on its own, how are we using technology as a tool for education and participation? And so with these power towers that can kind of group and organize units of desks, you would have the opportunity to plug in your electronics on the top of your desk so that you could plug in and unplug them as you needed them rather than drawing that power all the time, for example. And you could also have access to that information that would tell you, what kind of energy you were drawing from that outlet. And you could scan the QR code on your phone and be told, here's 10 tips for reducing that energy usage. And so really thinking about what that immediate engagement is and how you're learning from your building, how you're in control of the space. And then you might go downstairs a little bit later in the day and find one of these balconies to work on in a lounge and enjoy some time there with colleagues or just on your portable devices doing some quieter work in a nice daylit space. And you would then perhaps go find the restroom in the morning where you might learn something and be alerted to. This is just a fun example of how we come to understand our impact, again, on the environment with this sink that is a fish bowl, fish tank. And then, you wash your hands and get ready to go downstairs and you find the dining balcony. And you're here in this beautiful kitchen and dining area where you can engage with others who are working in the building and colleagues and other people that you haven't met yet who work in the building. You are aware of kind of what kind of water you're using, and again, you have a little fish here to remind you that every time you turn that on, you're taking water from someone or somewhere else. And thinking about how waste is measured. If you throw something away, you can see the scale register that and you know, be understanding of the fact that if you threw it in the recycling, that was a positive increase in measurement, and if you threw it in the trash, it maybe wasn't so positive. And so starting to really understand, again, how we are sensitive to information. Rather than just giving me a kilowatt hour number at the end of the week or day or month, you know, how we understand information at the scale that it's going to allow us to change our behavior and our values. And then a little later after lunch, you head down to a room, one of the shared spaces that you've reserved for your colleagues to give a presentation from 2:30 to 4 p.m. So not unlike the situation we're in right now. You know, thinking about, you know, how you engage those spaces and how you can start to use materials to talk about what sustainable construction ideas and how buildings engage sustainable materials, and also thinking about how those materials can be used to kind of theme spaces. You can imagine, rather than going to conference room A1, you end up at, you know, conference room living wall, or conference room water tank, or, you know, something like that. And then, you know, after your meeting, you use the restroom again, and you head up the elevator. So you're here, and you use the restroom, and you head up the elevator to go on to the roof garden, because it's a beautiful afternoon, and you have a little work to finish up, and you have the opportunity to kind of, again, engage with some of those peers, and you can be working there. Maybe grab a snack or a tomato for dinner, depending on what time of year it is, you know, something to take home with you. These gardens would be available to the users, but mostly maintained and interacted with by the co-op, occupying the first floor kind of retail equivalent. So they would kind of manage the surplus of whatever the employees didn't participate in using, and then sell it in the co-op. And, you know, then it's coming along the end of your day, around 5:30, you head back to your office and pack up a few things and unplug all of your electronics before you go home, and then head downstairs again and find yourself in this atrium space where you're, again, alerted of what are the metrics that you used throughout the day. Not what did the building do, but what did I do? How many cups of coffee did we pour from the communal coffee pot? How many ounces of filtered water did we drink today? And again, starting to engage that physical health and personal wellness with the building wellness and the environmental wellness. And also chasing the light, and this idea that in the evening, you're exiting the building into the sunlight in the summer, in the longer parts of the year. So when you enter, you come in and you kind of journey toward the light and follow the light throughout the buildings and the spaces throughout the day, and then exit again out into the sunlight. So, just in conclusion, moving forward, I see an opportunity for this kind of design idea and process to be integrated with processes we already have of monitoring self and performance. And so the Fitbit is kind of this new sensation that's sweeping the nation, and people are loving the opportunity to kind of be aware of their performance personally and health related. And so, you know, a few adaptations to that system, and not only do you know the number of calories you burned and steps you took when you took the stairs all day at work, but now you also know how much energy you saved your building, or you know, what opportunities you have to improve that relationship and that performance as well. And in closing, I will say this quote really inspired me throughout this project. This much voiced, multifaceted, contentious term refers to a pattern of living and working, not a gadget, device, or trophy. Sustainability isn't something you have, it's something you do. And it's not something that we achieve for the sense of trophies. It's something that we achieve in the way we encourage people to live sustainably. And with that, I would just like to thank you all for your attention and invite you to ask any questions or comments.
I congratulate you. I think you touched on something which is very untouched. It's untouched because it's social behavior. But I think what you said in a nutshell, is giving positive reinforcement for good behavior, which is what we're taught from a very young age. As a mother, I do that to my kids all the time. I like that in July, throw every napkin in. If I see that, I'm putting in the trash. Hey, well, everyone loves encouragement. And I think to make a better environment, this is a very good step. And I really appreciate your son's studies. Not going into the real details of the design, but the thought process. That when I about this, will the sun will be in front of me or back of me? I think it's a very good one.
Thank you very much.
I would like to congratulate you as well. I think it's a very interesting concept. I do have a few comments though.
Yes.
And this reminds me of a school I visited in Dallas. It's called the Lady Bird Middle School. And it's supposedly a net zero school. And what happens in that school, the school has a lot of solar arrays on the roof, has wind turbines and all that, but the most interesting thing, it has these things called dashboards throughout the school that measure the energy the school is producing. And not only that, the school is going paperless. The kids are given iPads, and the kids are connected to the dashboards of the school. And so the kids are vested on saving energy, to the point where if a cloud goes over the building, the energy peaks, the usage of city energy, and if a cloud goes away, it's blue sky, it goes back to being green. And so the kids go to the bathroom and they use those Dyson dryers, and all of a sudden it's all red. And so the culture in that school becomes the kids are enforcing each other to keep it on the green, keep it on the green. So they're actually doing this concept of measuring and permanently with themselves, kind of like that Fitbit, but they use it on their iPads live all the time. So I think this is a great idea, and I'm glad to see it. One thing I comment though is on the study that you did of the usage, and you are doing this on today, and you were clear about that. You said it's today that I'm doing this, and for that I give you credit. However, I like to think about the future, and do we really will work like this in the future? Are we going to work more from home? Our office is going to be more multifaceted just for meetings. My wife, for example, now works 3 out of 5 days from home, and she shares an office with 3 other colleagues at her institute. And when she goes to work, she only needs a chair and a little desk. And now that institute is saving money for having not spent so much energy and so forth, and she works a lot from her house. Another thing, the stairs. I see 2 mundane fire stairs coming up, and one, is that a stair? I can't tell.
Yeah.
You show one stair. I work in a place where people take the stairs in a 10-story building. And they tell me how creepy it is to go to the fire stair, and how great the fire stair would be if it was incentivized, and I didn't see that here. I think there would be an opportunity to do the reward that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So kind of taking this to a next level, and thinking about the possibilities of how you're going to use this in the future. Like when the iPad or the iPhone was invented, nobody needed that until somebody invented that. Now we can do away with it. It's the same thing here. You have to invent things that we don't need now. And for that, I congratulate you on that step, and I think it could have gone a little further.
Yeah.
And one comment on technology.
Sure.
That wall would require a lot of structure too. All right.
Okay. Well, I would like to speak just for clarity, because I didn't touch on this enough, I don't think. It's hard to see kind of over here at the end, but there are the 2 fire stairs, and then there is this stairwell that kind of wraps around this morning cut. That would be...
Does it go all the way up?
Yes, that goes all the way up. And so it's...
So if you want to go all the way up, you can take the stairs and down.
Yes, you can see it's the line work is very light, I'm sorry, but it actually kind of winds up this opening all the way
Because
to
there's
the
crazy
top.
people in my office that do that. I don't.
Yes, so that was not made clear on my part, but there is that stair that was celebrated intentionally for that.
Oh, thank you.
Maybe you want to address the structures comment as well?
Oh no, no. So that is something that I considered, and one of the things that
Thank you for this.
I had a great structural engineer as my chair to help me with that. But also, this system of a cable net system essentially works as a very large frame structure. So the cables are in tension and the glass is in compression, and it's creating this frame. Again, the diagrams are kind of at the end there, but it's creating this frame around the building in two directions by stretching that cable tight, and so it's essentially acting like a large frame structure or column beam system.
So, wait a minute. So, this is for my own education because I've never seen this. So, we have curtain wall systems that support each other, right? That need structure.
Yes.
We have space frames that can do this stuff we don't. This is yet another system.
Yes.
This is something, this holds itself up against wind loads, against everything.
The Time
We-
Warner
we
Center in
got
New
it.
York would be probably the easiest. You've been to Time Warner Center in New York?
Yeah,
Big
Yes.
giant glass wall.
that's
That's
all I
this.
guess.
Except the cable.
Yes.
Really tight cable
Yeah,
holds it
giant
from
cable.
wobbling.
Okay.
I have another question on that.
Sure.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding your sun study a little bit, but it seems to me that you're doing the opposite of what I would expect, that you're putting, it seems that you're creating a large greenhouse with, and putting concrete where you would have the opportunity to get ambient light.
So
Why are you-
I think that I appreciate that you brought that up, because certainly most of this was driven by the opportunity for direct light. That's what I was after when I started this, direct sunlight, because there was not a lot of opportunity on this site to get direct sunlight, so I wanted to take it where I could get it. So that is what drove the sun study, thinking about where the sun is able to come in directly and move deep into the building. And also thinking about, it would seem like a large greenhouse, but that is something that through further investigation in environmental systems and everything is certainly necessary, but also from my initial understanding, very possible. And one of the other things that, again, I did not have time to go into further detail on, but that I had been thinking about, is that this system would actually be a triple glazed glass panel in the system where the films between the lights of glazing would be low E and also fritted in different patterns and intensities. So another sun study of, you're still getting that direct light, but what is the heat kind of factor of that is forthcoming. But
I remember the first time I worked in Saudi Arabia coming from North America, and how much we here put a value on sunlight, and how much in another place sun is not a place you want to be. And so that does raise an interesting question here, because you're seeing sunlight penetration, not just light, but sunlight penetration as positive, and yet it has so many negative aspects in terms of building up the heat of the building and having to cool it down and stressing all the services. So I agree, I mean, and I realize it's cultural. We might value the sunlight, but sometimes sunlight isn't positive. And it's interesting that you're using the aspect of light penetration, maybe more than maybe more than sun penetration, to get further down into the building. Maybe it's not the sun so much as the nature of the building.
I think you raise a lot of really interesting and really critical issues that are kind of at the core of the challenge of all of the rating systems, and that's how do we measure the success of what we're failure of what we're doing, which is not always done, or not at all, and how do we and then also maybe a kind of related set of issues, how do we impact behavior or work at the scale of the user. And I think there's a couple of different ways you could take it. I mean, you've taken it toward a building, kind of spatial, in some ways a spatial exploration, but then also these pinpointed devices that might impact it. And I wonder if, and then there's the rating system question that's still out there. And I guess for me, in this terms of the spatial execution, I started thinking about our conversation about the last project and this issue of how do you incentivize this kind of thinking about, for developers or anybody else or a client. And I wondered if you could actually almost do this with the productivity measurements that he was doing and say maybe rather than one large atrium that I think would have a lot of problems like the ones that we're seeing in this movie.
Because we're running away from it.
But what if you started to think about small punctures that maybe plants could be growing, maybe you could start to say, well, this would remove this much of usable square footage, but it would expose people to natural air, natural light, indirect light, plants. It would have these quantifiable other effects on users. That would be one direction. The other one, there was a question that, I can't remember which one of the funding agencies ran it last year, but they were asking it for a call for proposals for sort of individual furniture or wearable devices or something that could be at the scale of the user to modulate the environment. And so that seems to be maybe some potential for thinking about it that embedded in this scale of exploration, maybe not so much about, well, or in addition to sort of measuring what we do, but thinking about how could we have more localized controls.
Yes.
Well, we're so used to now being incentivized on a number of levels, like when you buy gas and things like that, and with these new apps that you can get to help monitor some of that, I could see an employer trying to find Groupon kind of benefits for their employees to do, certain kind of energy savings, because it ultimately gets back to saving that employer.
Right.
And just as we were talking in the last one about how to incentivize, I think the incentive could come from the employer themselves, because you are there because you're working.
So you get more Christmas bonus and you have more energy.
Well, and that could be a factor of the relationship of the building energy savings as well. So with the Bullitt Center, for example, just became Living Building Challenge certified this year in Seattle, speculative office building, and they have actually been using so much less energy than they intended or have been generating with their huge solar array, that none of the tenants paid for electricity. They didn't pay utilities this year. So, that savings on their part then could be redistributed to employees. And I definitely think there's a layer of this that is beyond my current understanding of kind of computer technology that integrates, kind of the RFID relationship of monitoring at the scale of the tenant, each tenant, how many times does someone from your company scan their card and print something from the print center or whatever, and then also at the scale of the user, and starting to think about having, another thing that motivates behavior in this way is like the behavior incentives throughout the building. So whichever tenant uses the least amount of energy for their scale size, gets a prize this, doesn't pay utilities this year. No, I mean, not necessarily.
But all the incentives so far seem all to do with finances. I wonder if there might be other ways that are kind of knowledge-based. Like, so if you imagine you had a lot of these buildings and they were somehow linked together, and you could actually see the collective effect of the reduction of power, energy, or water use in terms of that number of how many Earths we're using each year. And maybe that is a way to go back to an idea about
what I saw in Dallas.
feeling
Like
good.
Yes.
the kids were not motivated by money because they don't even care, but they were motivated by Earth and by
the green versus the
environmental sustainability. And the more the needle was on the green on that building, the more they felt about it. And they asked for the principal of the school to put paper towels in the bathrooms, and she said, no way, I'm going to keep the Dyson dryers, and although they go on the rent, but I don't care. But that's the way it was that kind of incentive.
And I think that is a huge part of, we've been talking about cost incentives because it does have a lot to do with the office culture, certainly. But a huge incentive societally from this kind of design approach and what I imagine is possible for our future of sustainable living on this planet is, the reward is you understanding the benefit of the environment to yourself and your relationship with the environment, the natural environment, the built environment, and really understanding the value that you both have for
But
each
it's
other.
still then about you, right? It's still then about the self. Right, then the ultimate, like in that argument,
Yes.
which I think is, I would hope that it's about, the reason you then take that on is because you realize, well, keeping the earth good will make me feel better as a human. So maybe we have to, change that. I mean, I just think of those simple things where you see like the paper towels, these are made of trees. Right, and you see that sign and it makes you think,
Right.
oh yeah, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Like the
I would
fishbowl
just
thing.
expand your argument a little bit to be
I
that
see
it's
what you're
not
saying.
just about,
Sure.
the understanding you get is, oh, I need to save the earth because that'll make me feel good.
Well,
Right?
it
still
will
seems anthropocentric
improve,
to that.
yeah, I see
But
what you're
I
saying.
think incentives work on all levels, for instance. I mean, I think the kids were influenced by competition and seeing colors turn. Maybe the adults are really incentivized by financial. I mean, this is
But there are other things that can be quite sophisticated and could be actually, you wouldn't notice that you're doing, but you're doing, who knows, maybe somebody will come up with a tile that you walk on and your weight will appear on your wrist.
The person behind you.
And all of a sudden, you go up the steps and you say, whoa, I just lost how many ounces or whatever. All of a sudden, you're incentivized to go up the steps and you're using this, what is it called?
Piezoelectric floor
You can
tiles, yeah.
use that stuff and you're creating energy. I don't know, I'm just
Yeah.
thinking.
I think that is.
I think the argument that Ronit is making, though, is that not only can you feel incentivized by what you're doing for you, but you can also begin to visualize what you're doing as part of
Yes.
a community.
Yes, and I think that's
what
really
I,
important.
Yeah, what I think is just so great about your thesis, and I want to invite you to speak to my students next year, is
Okay,
it's
I
the
would
first
love
time I've seen a student use that design invention to design ways in which buildings and people can communicate. And I get the sense from the way you're talking that this is just the beginning, that there's more in your head, it's just waiting to come out. So I think this is a really great avenue for design invention, and I think that you've really opened up this conversation. So I now that I'm talking, I also want to say that I think a next step for you, many next steps, of course, but a next step is to really look at your illustrations. You gave us, I think, a fantastic verbal narrative about life in this building. And I'm not convinced that your images support the verbal narrative because it's so strong. So I think that there are many ways that you could both think about designing in ways that promote the narrative, and also picking the place you illustrate and illustrating your ideas. For example, I'm looking at that working office, and I don't see the daylight penetration, because I think that's one of the keys. Because in your narrative, I think a lot of what you're speaking about is the delight of working in these places. So yes, you're fulfilling your social responsibility, but man, you're getting so much back for it. This wonderful experience of being part of this kind of urban agriculture community, the wonderful experience of working in daylight, the wonderful control that you have over your physical environment when you communicate back and forth with it and ask it to give you air, and it opens the window and gives you air. So, I hope as you go on in your architectural career that you find more and more ways to get your vision across, visually as well as verbally. I think you're an eloquent spokesperson for the cause, and I think that as you continue onwards, that you'll draw out that vision very powerfully.
Yeah, I'd like to second that, because the way you talked about the human behavior was choice of moving to different places during the time of the day, rather than how you could control and modulate your own personal behavior. In the sense, some people want to stay at their desk for 8 or 9 hours. Others will want to get up and walk around, and so on. And as we've been developing more and more of these dashboard situations and also working environments, the ability to control your own space becomes extremely important. So going back to the egotistic side, we can either work by incentive or we can work by shame. But I think
Yes.
that in a certain sense, to really get into the user aspect of this is that I think understanding more so behavior of people and different cultures are going to behave differently and so on is to understand that context and to work with people who understand the particular culture you're working with. Have them be part of the architectural team to think about how you approach this. So in some instances, some things are going to be much more powerful than others. And to really think about the user as the designer of the building rather than the architect
Yes.
as the designer or the mechanical engineer who will say, oh my gosh, and I have this guy, we have this fellow at Carnegie Mellon who's brilliant MEP engineer, but he's totally against opening windows in high-rise buildings because it upsets the banks. Whereas in Germany, they do it all the time. Every building has a couple of windows, but here, culturally, we believe differently.
Right.
So, but it's all about individual control, at
Yes.
least here,
Yes.
in that sense. And we talked about it, but it didn't get into your it got into your narrative a little
Yeah.
bit, but not into the diagrams of the building, about the power of the user
Sure.
here to regulate.
Absolutely. I appreciate those comments, just because this was such a process of understanding, it definitely did come late to get to that, but it is something that I'm really excited about continuing to
Well, I mean,
investigate.
your thesis topic is a really fascinating one, and it's something that taking the worst of the lowest of the rating scales and how do you make that one of the biggest, at the same time achieve all of the other things. Because I think the human, rather than being passive, should be an active participant.
Absolutely.
I particularly appreciate you mentioning this. I mean, one of the many extraordinary things that I think Ashley did along this process was to look at all those different rating scales, understand, find common categories, put these different aspects in, to be able to produce that chart, that basically reveals how little
That's right.
credit is built in there for the actual user engagement.
Well,
And recognize what a big problem that is, and then go on to understand, all the social stuff that has to do with that behavior. Before ever getting to the point of trying to figure out then how do you actually incentivize and or shame.
Because we incentivize engineering and technology.
And economics,
And,
office building
yes.
design,
So
And
our
so-
efficiency.
committee was Professor Vogel and Professor Drake.
I've got just a couple of comments. I think, I see the main value of this is, look at all those rating systems, we're making less bad buildings. To get to sustainability, we're going to have to radically change our behavior, the way we work. We can't be driving around in cars all over the place and flying in airplanes all over the world. It's just not going to happen. It's not sustainable. And this is a flow in that direction. And then the other comment, if I remember right, there's a thing called BIDS. I think it comes
I
from
can't hear you, Carl.
A thing called BIDS. It's a computer system that collected Vivian Loftus about information about buildings. And the big thing that saves a whole lot of money is when you make a nicer place, so absenteeism goes down to a teeny little bit. The vast majority of money spent in that building is paying the salaries of people in that building. And
It's
it
increasing
blows away energy savings by orders of magnitude. And so by making a pleasant building, that's the big saving. I have no comments. But I'm going to tell you a few things.
Oh, gosh.
If you need a break, it's been a long day, long couple of days. We actually have a really nice little gallery. It's run by a faculty member and a student, which means the student does a lot of work. No offense, Renee. We also celebrated our students winning the ULI competition again this year. We would call it a rivalry with Harvard, but it's not really a rivalry if we keep beating them, right?
That's true.
Another group of students designed a sustainable enclosure retrofit for a building on campus and presented it to facilities, and now facilities is considering actually implementing it here on campus. The reason I'm telling you these seemingly random things is I'm pretty sure there's only one connecting thread between all these things, and you're looking at it right here. And oh, by the way, those things were all this semester while she was working on all of this too. To my way of thinking, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but I think this is kind of like hitting the triple crown as an architecture graduate student at the University of Maryland. So all I really want to say is I want to say, Ashley, you're a remarkable graduate student, and it's been a tremendous pleasure working with you, so thank you very much.
Thank you.